Hello everybody, Jediwarlock here, and welcome back to another video here on the channel. This is going to be a different type of video compared to those that I normally make, and that's for the simple reason that we're dealing with a much different topic. A few days ago I was cleaning out my closet and I stumbled across my self-made WoW guidebook from when I was in 4th grade. Which is 10 or 11 years ago now, and is pretty crazy to think about. Today, I wanted to go through this guidebook and basically show it off to you all, as it's a pretty good representation of where I was as an early WoW player all those years ago. Before we get started, I do want to just offer the reminder, or I suppose disclaimer, that this was 4th grade me trying to write a guidebook. And so naturally there's going to be plenty of mistakes and inaccuracies that I'm going to clear up as we go through it. But I honestly think that's part of the fun, and it's kind of exciting that I've grown so much in my knowledge of the game, and I think it'll be interesting to see what the game presented to me in terms of knowledge. Back at this time, this was before I really had access to YouTube or, free reign to explore on the internet. And so the only real knowledge that I had from the game was my own experience playing it, right? There weren't a lot of outside resources that I could rely on or look up information about the game. And so this guidebook is really going to be kind of the sum of my experiences up to a certain point playing the game, which I think is going to be pretty interesting. Also, thank you to those of you who responded to the most recent community post. I've been gathering some Q&A questions for an upcoming video. I'm still putting that video together, so if any of you have any questions about me or about the channel, go ahead and add those as comments on this video as well, and I'll try to get them worked into the upcoming video. So with all that being said, let's dive right in and explore my self-made WoW guidebook. So here is the original title page for the journal, or the front cover rather. I blocked out some personal info here, but more importantly, you can see the pencil sketch of the logo on the front here is really faded after 10 years. You can barely make out the W WoW shape right here. Thankfully though, as I was cleaning out my closet, I also came across another journal that I was using for some other things, but it turns out that I almost recreated the logo exactly as it was on the original. So this provides a better view of kind of the front cover in essence. You can see the WoW logo surrounded by some equipment, some weapons, if you will. And so this is kind of the front page of the journal. It looks pretty much the same as the original, just in Sharpie instead of pencil. Let's go ahead and actually look inside the journal. You can see as we go through this, even my young self tried to follow some sort of logical progression with the guidebook. So kudos to younger me, I guess. You can see here on the first page the setup to even start playing the game. Let's zoom in here. Find World of Warcraft, play free now. Of course, there were all sorts of those ads and I guess sort of slogans going around in the early 2010s, or just around 2010 rather, where play free up to level 20 was kind of the big thing, and so that was the advertising you'd see a lot for the game. You'd log into your BattleNet, and then you'd be able to start playing the game. You can see the little Blizzard sign here, which is kind of funny. Similar story over here. It says characters. If you're making a new character, of course, you go in and create them and customize them. But if you have a character already made, I guess I was calling them pre-built characters, then you just go right into the game. Now this page is where things start to get really interesting, because it starts to show where some of my shortcomings, I suppose, with the game are. You can see over here that I have Alliance, Justice, and Horde Evil, which is kind of the more black and white approach of looking at the game. I think most of us now recognize that both of the factions are a little bit more nuanced in how they're represented, but to 4th grade me, it was pretty cut and dry, good versus evil, which, I mean, wasn't a huge problem back then. You could just play the game, and I guess I was more into playing the good guys because I thought the Alliance was the Justice side, which is kind of funny. You can see here descriptions of each of the races here. I think it's particularly funny. The Undead, the Forsaken, they're a freaky race. I'm not sure why I chose that adjective there, but there you go. Same goes for the Trolls down here. I don't think I used this word knowing what it means or doesn't mean. I think I was probably going for something like maybe tribal or shamanistic. I'm not sure, but I don't think remedial was the word that I wanted to go with. I also think Blood Elves down here are pretty interesting. A sly race that has a constant hatred for Night Elves. This is of course highlighted in the Blood Elf starting zones, which were the only ones I was really familiar with for the Horde faction, so that's kind of funny that, you know, I decided to emphasize that on their little info sentence here. Moving on to classes. Let's zoom in here. I just kind of went through and basically just listed all of the possible specs for each of the classes. I redesigned their little icons. It looks like here, obviously Hunters and Warlocks, I added kind of this bonus pet thing. Rogues have stealth. Druids can morph. Pretty straightforward stuff. I do think this is the greatest thing on this page. It says level 55s only, and then Burning Crusade, and then if you go to the next slide here, I lifted it up and it reveals the Death Knight class, which is kind of funny for multiple reasons. The foremost being, of course, that Death Knights were not added until Wrath of the Lich King, but I still think it's kind of funny that, you know, this melding of Burning Crusade and Wrath, we're actually going to see that multiple times throughout this guide, so I'm not exactly sure why I couldn't differentiate between the two, but that is definitely one of the biggest inconsistencies we'll be seeing. Over here on the right, this page just is basically the key for each of the little categories I put the classes in. Then, of course, some sort of spell down here. Not sure exactly what that is. Moving on. Oh, Death Knight page. Moving on, we have customizing your character. Of course, this is going to reflect mostly the Alliance races, because that's who I was playing mostly as a kid. Looks like this page got a little bit blurry. My apologies for that. But you can see going down and customizing each of the factors and whatnot. I definitely messed up these gender icons here. Not sure what's going on there. But after that, you of course have your different facial expressions. And then, I know it's hard to read here, but barbers. Go to barbers in any capital city to change your hair. So, I think when I was a kid and I discovered you could do that, I was pretty happy. Over here, moving on to your stats. Stats can determine life, your level, and your use, which I think is like your resource, or that's what I was calling your resource. So you can see just a simple tooltip of your character's info bar, essentially. And then down here it explains levels. As you progress through the game, you will get higher levels. You start at level 1. The highest you can go is level 75. Now, this might seem just like a random level that is not only incorrect, but just kind of out of place. And to my knowledge, I think why I said 75 is because the Stormwind city guards, who are, you know, supposed to be these protectors of the city, super high level, I think I just almost correlated those or attributed their level to the max level, right? It's like, yeah, of course you're going to have the big cities have the toughest guys protecting them. And so, of course, in Wrath of the Lich King, max level is 80, of course, but for some reason I put 75, and I think that is because of the Stormwind guards, which I think is kind of interesting. Then, of course, there's just this little wrap-up statement before we move on to the next chunk of content. Basic controls, all pretty straightforward. I do think it's funny, I did highlight the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. I focused on mages because up to that point that was the class that was most familiar to me. So you have your fireball, your frost armor, and then over here in your backpack it looks like maybe you have your boar meat or wolf meat and some linen cloth. Very common items, probably questing in Elwynn Forest. That's where I was questing a lot, especially when I was just starting out in the game. So that's kind of a nice little detail there. Quests, again, pretty straightforward. There's not a lot to talk about on these pages. The one thing I would mention down here is that I find it interesting there's a lack of the blue exclamation point, which is a daily quest giver, right? A quest you can only do once a day. And I think that's just because, again, at this point I was probably level 20 or 30, and, you know, wandering around Duskwood or maybe Stranglethorn Vale, you're not going to run into these daily quests quite as often compared to in the expansion content, where there's a lot more end-game like quest patterns. So that's probably the one thing that's missing here. Other than that, pretty straightforward stuff. Moving on to flight paths. Again, we're dealing with these exclamation points. It says, flight paths are places where you can buy a ride to another place. Seems pretty straightforward. Again, this looks to me like a map of the Eastern Kingdoms. You have what I presume to be Stormwind here, and then maybe Lakeshire, Darkshire, and then Rebel Camp down here in the south, which is the example right here. So you can really see that this is kind of the breadth or the scope of where I had explored up to this point in the game when I made this guide. So I think that's pretty cool that this is kind of a snapshot of my progress on one of my very first characters. Additionally, I do want to point out that I had tried multiple characters and multiple races at this point, because it says depending on your race you will ride on different creatures, griffins, bats, hippogriffs, etc., which is definitely true and I think is a cool detail in the game. Briefly mentions trainers here. Trainers can sell you powers, attacks, etc. Use your powers in combat. So I definitely did know how to level up when I was younger, which was helpful. It's a pretty easy part of the game in my opinion. Hunters and warlocks, of course, also have their pets. You can see here, I think I tried a dwarf hunter, was probably my first hunter character, and you can see a lot of the examples here are just the very low level critters that you would tame. Or not critters, beasts rather. But then warlocks over here, of course, they have their imp, their voidwalker, and eventually their succubus minion. I don't know what this thing is right here. It looks like some sort of alien, but I guess that was as close as I could get to drawing a succubus when I was younger. So there's that, I suppose. Moving on, we have professions. You can see here, you can buy, loot, or make potions, buy them from merchants, or make them from alchemy. I believe alchemy and herbalism were the first professions I ever tried out. And you can see here, these are just kind of the starting recipes that you would get if you were an apprentice alchemist. Probably, again, I was running around in Elwynn Forest, trying these things for the first time. Over here is a complete list of the professions, or I suppose complete in my worldview of the game at the time. I think, looking through these, first aid is missing. I put tanning here for some reason, which is I suppose some sort of mix between tailoring and leatherworking, because neither of those are present. And then enchanting, and it looks like inscription are also both missing. So, you know, not a complete list, but a partial list. I do find it interesting. Burning Crusade added jewel crafting, which this is referencing here. And so I'm not really sure how I knew that this profession was added in Burning Crusade, but I didn't really know about inscription yet, so kind of interesting to think about. Mounts. Moving on to mounts. Level 20, you can buy a mount that can transport you faster than just walking. And then, of course, warlocks and paladins with their special mount spells. I get my namesake, actually, from my first warlock, Jediwarlock. And man, I was so happy when I was able to just level up at 20 and get a mount as a spell. I thought that was just the coolest thing ever. Then, of course, over here on the right side, we have some tips. Never give out your account name or password. Press space to jump. Press enter. Type your message. Then press enter to say it. Again, pretty simple stuff that we probably do every day in the game, or avoid doing in the game in the first example. But I think I took these from a mix of the little hints that you get when you're logging into the game, and then probably just some of my personal experiences. That wrap-up's kind of blurry. My apologies again, but that's not super important. Looks like we have a whole chapter dedicated to pets, which I think is very fitting considering I was trying out Warlock and Hunter both around the same time. It says you control your summoned pet, or to control your summoned pet rather, use the second control bar. Of course, you have your pet bar that appears above your abilities. Again, this is kind of a more in-depth look at the pet examples. You can see here, of course, the Hunter pet has a lot of the Dun Moreau and Loch Medan beasts, probably because that was where I was questing in most of the time on my dwarf. And then Warlocks, it goes more into detail on each of the pets. So you have your Imp, and then moving over here, the Void Walker, and then the Succubus. I think it's pretty funny. Again, I had no idea how to draw this pet. She kind of just looks like a big fairy or something. But I think even more funny is it says powers coming soon. So that just goes to show you that I was literally making this book in my free time at school as I was kind of learning these things about the game, right? And so I think this highlights maybe a gap in my knowledge that I hadn't quite gotten there in the game yet, which is kind of funny to see. But, you know, I guess 10 years later, the powers are still coming soon. We're still waiting to know what this pet can really do. Then companions, of course, it says, companions don't fight, but they provide a comfort zone for you. Companions include a rabbit, a squirrel, or a cat. Others are an orphan, which I think is a little bit out of left field, but I think this is referencing the Orphan Week holiday, where you can have an orphan accompany you on your travels, basically. So I think that's why that's there. Going back to mounts again, mounts can transport you up to 3 times faster than running. I don't really know if that figure is accurate. It's probably just a random guess, but that sounds pretty fast to me. And then, of course, it lists each of the racial mounts for each of the characters, each of the races. Gnomes, they're Mechno Striders, naturally. And then Undead, Forsaken, they have a Skele-horse, which, again, pretty accurate description of these mounts. Just think it's kind of funny to highlight some of those. And one more time, it looks like we're going back to the Hunter pets. To summon a pet, tame the pet using the power, well, tame pet. Makes sense? Then use the power summon pet to bring your pet to you. Seems pretty straightforward. Moving on to the raids chapter, chapter 4. This is where I think some of my logic goes off the rails a little bit. I probably really needed a real WoW guide at this point, but again, playing WoW alone most of the time and not having access to a lot of this information, it was kind of that I was just kind of going through the game, you know, blind without a lot of assistance. So let's take a look at this. Raids. Raids are for 2 to 6 party members. I don't think those numbers are quite right. If you try to go into ZG or Anchorage with 6 people, you're probably in trouble. But let's see what else this page has to say. They consist of fighting elite enemies and rescuing prisoners. Makes sense. I think this first one here, Stormwind City Stockade Jailbreak, this is technically a dungeon, not a raid, but it does have some pretty accurate information. I think I was basing this off of one of the quests that you can see here, where you have to break in and deal with the riots, basically, in the stockade. This one, I'm pretty sure I made up completely just to fill this page. I at this point, right, I was still a level 25 or 30, maybe 35, and so after finding the ZG entrance, you know, I just thought like, wow, that's like the biggest, baddest set of enemies in the whole game. And so I think I just kind of designed this little scenario around what I knew about ZG from getting one shot at the gates, right? So, you know, we know there's trolls, probably have to take care of them for one of the quests. And then I think the funniest part is that I put Loktar as one of the maybe hypothetical bosses of this raid. Obviously, for those of you who know, Loktar is the greeting or hello in the orc language. And so I think I was just associating that maybe with trolls and orcs together somehow. I'm not sure, but I thought that was a kind of interesting detail. On the back page here, it continues with Gnomragon, with the leper gnomes and the trogs, and then of course collecting the different machine parts. I think both of these are related to the actual Gnomragon quests, but again, as I was mostly playing alone, I couldn't exactly walk into the dungeon by myself and kind of see for myself, right? So some interesting discrepancies. Again, Gnomragon is not a raid, it is a 5-man dungeon, but you know, at least it's in the right category, right? And then of course we do move over to dungeons themselves. Dungeons are for 3 party members. It consists of clicking Dungeon Finder, available at level 15. Now, I find this to be a kind of funny 2-step process. Have 3 or more party members, and then click Find Group. It sounds like if you already have your party members, you don't really need to find group, but considering dungeons need 5 people, maybe you do need to find group for more people? I'm not sure, but I think this is me documenting the Dungeon Finder tab. Of course, playing on a very, very low population server for most of my life, this feature wasn't ever really necessary, or was never really used, and so I think this was me just trying to extrapolate some information based off of this button that you can just click at level 15, which is kind of cool. Wrap up, and then I think last but not least we have this extras chapter, chapter 5. It says World of Warcraft has many extras to entertain you even more. Then it lists, or I list some of the holidays: Brewfest, Darkmoon Fair, Noble Fest, probably referencing Noble Garden, and then again Orphan Week. This list is obviously far from complete, but I was probably just basing it off of, at that point, probably a few months, probably less than a year of WoW knowledge. So it's totally possible I missed some of the holidays, or I just didn't even have a chance to see them yet. Down here, I think this is especially cool. The monthly wars category that I listed. This is referencing the battleground system in WoW, and the monthly component I believe comes from those recruiter NPCs that show up in the capital cities, and you can talk to them to basically enter certain battlegrounds for like the bonus reward weeks or weekends or however that works. We start off pretty strong. We have Warsong Gulch, Eye of the Storm, and Isle of Conquest, or Isle of Conquest rather, which are 3 real battlegrounds in the game. But after that, the list starts to get a little bit more iffy. You can see here the Cenarian emission, not carbon emission, Cenarian emission. I believe this is referencing the Cenarian emissaries that you can find in the capital cities. However, it seems I was mistaken here in that this is not actually contributing to a battleground, but rather just the Cenarian Circle quests that you can just find out in the world. Similar thing, or a similar discrepancy here, we have the League of Arathor and Arathi Basin as separate events. I'm not sure why, but the League of Arathor is the reputation for the Alliance, and then of course Arathi Basin is the real battleground itself. So I feel like these two should have been condensed into just Arathi Basin, but again, you know, things can be mixed up and conflated when you're just kind of going off the bare minimum rather of information. To round out the list here, we have the Winter Grasp Conflict, and then the Alliance and Horde Vanguards. I'm not sure why I decided to include these two at the bottom here, since these are just the Northrend general reputations. I think it's possible I found out about both of these by just exploring and taking the boat to Northrend at some point instead of actually leveling. That was a pretty common theme when I was a lot younger, is just exploring and finding cool things compared to actually getting the max level. But yeah, these two, obviously not battlegrounds. Even Winter Grasp isn't really a battleground. It's more of a, I guess, outdoor battleground. Outdoor PvP area, something like that. But yeah, overall, I think I did hit most of the real battlegrounds in the game. I think the only one missing here would be Alterac Valley. That's the one I can think of. And the reason for that is I just don't think I'd made my way that far north yet, right? I mean, probably Refuge Point is the farthest that I'd gone north at that point if, you know, I was finding the League of Arathor and Arathi Basin perhaps. But yeah, I just really hadn't seen the Alterac Valley area, or I wasn't able to see the, or I hadn't found the recruiters in the cities, rather, in the capital cities. So that's probably the reason for some of these decisions that I made when I was making this list, but I just think it's kind of funny that I tried to summarize all of the battlegrounds and whatnot right here. Moving on, we have the Dark Moon Fair. It says the Dark Moon Fair comes to small towns once in a while, like Goldshire, Brill, and Azurwatch. I know it comes to Goldshire, but I'm not sure about these other two towns. If someone does know, maybe put that down in the comments. Things to do: you can buy fireworks, get a treat, fight in arenas, and get exclusive arms. I'm not sure about the arena part. I'm pretty sure you can go into arenas at any time, so I'm not quite sure why I decided to associate arenas with the Dark Moon Fair, but it's kind of curious to think about. Noble Garden, obviously the Easter-themed holiday. It says the Noble Fest comes to Goldshire 1 week every year to provide an Easter egg hunt for curious travelers. Gather 10 brightly colored eggs. I think most people who play classic WoW are familiar with this kind of festive themed quest. I definitely remember doing this when I was younger, and yeah, you can see here's one of the eggs to kind of round out that page. Then we've reached what amounts to be the last 2 real pages. We have Orphan Week. Orphan Week is exciting, and on Orphan Week you can summon an orphan to be your companion. Then it says there's a very fine line in between pets and companions. Of course, your orphan is your companion. You are not having your orphan fight for you on the battlefield. Then of course the orphan whistle right here that you'd summon the Orphan With. And lastly, we've arrived at the final page. It says, congratulations, you've completed the whole book. What do we receive as a reward? We get our WoW medal, we get the Winter Grasp logo, we get a fireball, and a militia short sword. So overall, I'd feel that is a pretty good quest reward for reading through this whole thing. It also says, if you would like, turn the page that is next. Or something. Something along those lines. So let's go ahead, flip to the next page. And last but not least, I included a little bonus advertisement for the Burning Crusade for some reason. Of course, right here, the logo, World of Warcraft, and the Burning Crusade. The Burning Crusade unlocks Draenei, Blood Elves, and the continent of North End. North End unlocks places like Borean Tundra, Howling Fjord, and Frost Winter Mountains. So that is quite a lot to unpack there in like 2 sentences. Obviously, we have a little bit of mix-up between Burning Crusade and Wrath of the Lich King again, with Northrend being added in Wrath, and Draenei and Blood Elves being a part of Burning Crusade itself. I also think it's funny I included Frost Winter Mountains. I think this could probably reference either Storm Peaks or Ice Crown maybe, but I think the reason behind this is obviously I hadn't been there in the game yet, and the other part of it is that I really only worked on this book during my free time at school, right? When we had inside recess, when it was snowing out or something, I would literally work on this at school, and I can't really remember a time when I would work on this at home. And so most of this is just from my memory during the school day, and so that could explain why some of these things aren't totally factual when it comes to the details of the maps and whatnot. I think I have one more slide here. Yeah, last but not least, I wanted to finish off today. I found this kind of bonus page that was totally separate, but I think it's kind of a funny little poster or advertisement from, or for WoW rather, Alliance and Horde. Then down here we have kind of this Burning Crusade section, Azeroth versus Outland with the Exodar and Silvermoon City. I think this is pretty cool. I, for some reason, have a very distinct memory of making this at school one day, so I'm kind of glad this stuck around and that I was able to discover this as well. That's pretty much it for this video. I'd like to thank you all for watching. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this video and my personal guidebook down in the comments. Covered a lot of ground here today talking about the guidebook, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed watching. So as always, if you liked the video, make sure to leave a like, comment down below with your thoughts. Again, if you have questions for the Q&A video that's coming out very, very soon, go ahead and post those as comments as well. Subscribe if you're new to join the Jedi Order, and until next time, may the Force be with you.